And welcome back. Just going to hang out here as always for a couple minutes as we wait for folks to jump into chat. Otherwise, today we're going to be talking about Melee.gg and not everything you can do with it, because I don't know everything you can do with Melee.gg despite using it for quite some time. But we're going to talk about the basics of running an event and all that good stuff. Rather than going through the script and the lesson like we normally do, we're actually just going to interact directly with Melee, as this is a tool that I can actually just stream to y'all. So I'm excited for this. How's everybody doing? Howdy No Breaks 58, how you doing today? And as always, if folks have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them in the chat. I'll get distracted from whatever I'm talking about, and I'll talk about whatever you bring up. Melee is we have an echo. Oh, we don't like having an echo. Okay. I hope that we don't have an echo, because I don't know how to get around that. You are hearing two mics. Let me check my audio mixer. Can you hear me now? We're just checking this real quick. Testing. Are we able to hear me? I know there's some delay and I wish I could get rid of it. But great. I'm quieter. Interesting. Alright, well, we'll adjust closer to the microphone and hopefully you'll be able to hear me a little bit better. We got a couple questions. No Break says, how are you? I'm doing fine. I'm actually really excited to talk about this because Melee is such a powerful tool. Cap App says, I would love for you to address the correct way to drop no-shows. I know there was some kerfuffle about there being a software bug. Yes, we will absolutely touch on that. I know that there are ways that users can drop players that can result in things that, how do you say, are suboptimal. Yeah. I think it's double no-show doesn't work neatly, but there are a lot of other ways to make sure that everything works out, and you can always just check your work. So, we're going to start by just swapping over to Melee, and we'll slowly move through this. So, number one, you're going to want to create an organization or be a part of an organization. You can do this by oh boy. 1 second. I know what we did. We don't have our cursor visible, and I want the cursor visible because that is important to y'all so that you can see what I'm doing. Let me just change some things. There we go. Okay. Now you should be able to see my cursor. Wonderful. Great. Okay, so now you can see my cursor. You can see what I'm doing. The first thing you're going to want to do is either go to an organization that you're part of or add another organization. If you add an organization, you just need a name and an email, and then you've created your organization. This is a great way to create a test organization so you can play around on your own, figure out how Melee works, and run into these bugs, or not necessarily bugs. I think there are relatively few bugs. It's more frequent that there is a not thorough understanding of Melee because it's such a complex tool. Most of the bugs that I've heard about with Melee are things being incorrectly entered, or things the system takes the information it's given and runs with that. But once you have your organization, you can either go to your tournaments down here or your current organization, and you'll be able to create an event. From here, you can just tap that good old create event button. You can also just go to the URL melee.gg/tournament/create. There are a million ways to get anywhere in Melee. And so I'm going to talk about the ways that I know. Over time, you might find different routes or shortcuts. This is one of the complications with Melee, is that because it's so powerful and everything is linked everywhere else, there aren't necessarily clean and singular paths. There isn't one way to do things. There are 5 ways to accomplish the same thing, but they each have a little bit going on that's a little bit different, and you want to use them in different scenarios for different reasons. But let's make this event. So we're going to make sure that we're in the correct organization. If you're working for different tournament organizers and you're part of their organization, you'll have this. Most of the time, you won't be creating the event. It should be the tournament organizer creating the event days, weeks, or even months in advance. If you are creating this, you may want to include location. That's optional. It's unnecessary. However, what you do want is to select the correct game. Selecting the game will also determine the tiebreaker math that goes into the back end. So if you pick Magic the Gathering, draws will be worth a match point. If you select Flesh and Blood, that's going to default to best of 1. Disney Lorcana is going to default to best of 2. Star Wars is best of 3 with no points for draws. So that's what we want because it will have the correct scorekeeping math. So we're just going to go ahead and click that. And then in this case, since it's for staff training purposes, we're going to click that as well. So it's not a public event that's available to everybody in the world to see, because otherwise we would just clutter up everything. Great. Now we have a lot of information to talk about. We're going to give it a name. When you're giving it a name, you're going to want to have a name that makes it easy to search for. If we hop over to find events, people will be able to search for stores, events, organizers, locations, etc. And let's see if tournaments are loading for us today. When you search for stuff, if you're searching by name, you want to have good SEO, search engine optimization, because otherwise you're not going to be able to find the event you're looking for. There's a lot of formats, there's a lot of tags, there's a lot of potential times. And so being able to find the event that you're looking for, if we just search for Star Wars pre-release, what do we get? If we're just lagging, we're just lagging. Sometimes this happens with Melee. Melee's primary purpose is not an event finder. You can do that sometimes. Generally, the best way to find an event is have it linked directly to you. You can also change your location for a variety of places. So if you're like, hey, I'm going to be traveling across the country, I want to see if there's anything, you can check that. But you're going to want to have a name for your event that matches what the event is so people can find it while searching. So we're going to have SWU Twilight of the Republic pre-release. And then we're going to include a time. And then we're going to include a location. And since we're on Coruscant, it's going to be 500 Republica. Yeah, the event finder is almost certainly the worst part of Melee, but also it's their lowest priority. Their priority is actually running the tournaments, not so much helping people find them. Helping people find them is a great add-on, but not required. Now, tournament type. You have tabletop and registration only. Tabletop is essentially any tournament where you're going to be playing Swiss rounds. Registration is just going to be a list of players. This is great for weekly play where you don't have scheduled rounds. You'll still be able to run the event, run it through Melee, put in information, and send it off to FFG, so it'll still count towards store metrics. It's also great if you want to run like a month-long sealed league or something like that, where players come in, get 6 booster packs, build a deck, and then they can come in and play whenever they want over the course of the next 4 or 8 weeks, and just play against somebody in the store. Doing that with registration only keeps track of your players, lets you know who's bought in, who's participating in the event, and you can keep track of their wins and losses that way without having the structure of a normal tournament or having to do it in an Excel spreadsheet. Since most events that you're going to be running most likely are going to be tabletop events, they're going to be standard tournament style, we're just going to select that this time. You're also going to want to select the type of event it is. Tags are optional, but they help people find the kind of event that they're looking for. In this case, we're running a pre-release, so we're going to go ahead and select that pre-release tag. The other pieces are the other types of events that stores can potentially certify, at least at this point in time, and that's what we have selectable as searchable tags. The schedule is generally going to be relatively straightforward. It's the time zone that you're in, start date, registration start and end, and unenrollment end date. Start date is self-explanatory. That is when the event itself begins. The registration start date means that you can set up a window for registration, so the event can be public for a period of time before registration opens. Registration end date means that you can close registration, or you can close online registration before the event. This means that you can say, hey, the event is Saturday morning. We're going to close online registration Friday night, which means that if you want to register on Saturday morning, you have to be in the building to register, which makes it a little bit harder for somebody to forget about the event. Unenrollment end date is, like the registration end date, a time when players are no longer able to unenroll themselves from the event. I don't know off the top of my head, I haven't seen this used before, but it gives you a little bit more control over when player lists are locked in. By default, registration start date is as soon as you post the event, and registration end date is when the event begins. So it's kind of built in. As soon as you hit start the event, registration ends. Player registration, you have two types. You have open and invite only. Open registration means that anybody online can enter the event. Entry type free means that anybody can join the event and you don't need a code to enter it. Code only means that you need to have a specific code given to you by a tournament organizer available in the store to sign up for the event. This is a way that you can limit events to particular groups of players. If you have an invitational or something along those lines, you can do a code only, or if it's like you want to focus on your local players, you can have a code only event, and while that code might get out online and spread around, people can register, then you're still prioritizing people who have access to the code, people who have access to your store. Invite only means that you directly add people to the event a little bit more closely. This is great for like a store championship after a store series or something along those lines, and other larger events are invite only. The Galactic Championship Day 2 is probably going to be set up as invite only because it's going to feature just folks who won planetary qualifiers and folks who did well enough on day 1 of the Galactic Championship. Because so many folks have however many rounds of buys, it is probable that, I don't know for sure, but I would presume that they just create a new tournament for day 2 rather than having those however many hundreds of players just have 7 or 8 or 9 rounds of buys on day 1 and then just go pairing from there. That seems miserable. But we then have branding. This allows you to add a cover image, some text, and a video. Kelrilo says, could you run an event with this on a phone? Yep, absolutely. You can access it on your phone. I recommend it tries to do some auto formatting for mobile. I recommend going into your settings and say display desktop website because that gives you all the information you need rather than compacting a little bit. But I've definitely run some events from my phone. Branding just lets you put up videos, text, that sort of thing for advertising for your event or your store. Player communication gives you some information about the event itself. A lot of this is very important to include to some degree or another. Letting folks know how long it will take for them to get their prizes, particularly if they're cash prizes, is key. Description is just a short description of the event. It'll be the same copy that you use everywhere else. Rules, you generally only need to consider this if it is a deviation from your norm. If you're requiring deck lists, you include that. If you're going to require 2 deck lists, you're going to do that. If there's something strange about the tournament format, let's say you're doing team trios and players need to have you can't have duplicates across multiple players, you would need to include that here. The schedule will include when the event starts, when it's expected to end, etc., etc. Prizes is your prize structure, and then contact is contact email for your customer service or anything along those lines. For something like weekly play, you probably don't need to fill out all of this information. The folks coming into your store know what to expect from weekly play. They've been here weeks in, weeks out. And so this doesn't matter for a lot of smaller events, but for something larger, particularly when people are traveling, having this information all in one place is super valuable. Player data requirements also includes some useful information. For competitive events, you're probably going to want to check off require Star Wars Unlimited ID on profile. The SWUID is how FFG tracks players, particularly for invites for the Galactic Championship or buys for the Galactic Championship this year. And in future years, they've said, according to the tournament regulations, that players will earn tournament points. Requiring this other information can be useful. If you want to do, like Pokemon has age brackets, and so you have a juniors bracket and an all ages bracket. You might want to run national events. Magic used to run national championships to find the best player in a given country or region, and having that data required to be shared means that you can run those events and make sure that you're playing with folks in a given region. Including email means that you have a guaranteed way to contact the players if you need to collect digital deck lists or reach out to them before the event, anything along those lines. If you're running a digital event, requiring a Discord username is generally something that's very important, because that's how people pair up against each other. However, Star Wars isn't going to be running any official digital events for quite some time, to the best of my knowledge. And pronouns is something that's great for communication. Having that as a requirement is something that allows people to better communicate about players in the event. Moving on to advanced options, you can see here we have a player cap. That's going to be relatively straightforward. That's going to be the number of players you can register. I encourage you to always put in a player cap, even for your weekly play. It would suck if you just had a boom of popularity and then a bunch of people came in and they were registered for the event and you don't have tables for them. Just know how many seats you have available or how many seats you can make available in case the event explodes in popularity, and put that player cap in there. You're also going to consider minimum age and maximum player age. It's possible that you have an age maximum because you're doing younger age brackets, or you have a minimum age because you're having an event at a place that doubles as a bar, or something along those lines, and the venue has an age requirement. Ignoring player check-in is a tool for primarily digital events. With digital events, you can't just see that people are there. They actually have to be at their computer and hit check-in. If you don't click this, any player who doesn't manually check in at the event will be dropped before round 1. This will generally lead to more players being dropped than not. Most people in paper events don't hit check-in because, again, it's a tool for digital events. Enable waitlist allows folks to register above the player cap, and just gives you a queue of first come first serve, which is very handy for very popular events. Country restriction, again, this is to allow you to run a national type event where players have to be from a particular country or region to play. Names on printouts, you can choose full names only, the player's choice, or usernames only. Generally, I tend towards full names just because you're playing an event with real people, and because there's more flexibility in usernames, and sometimes people don't think out their usernames in totality, it's just better to use people's actual names. For actual names, it doesn't have to be your legal name, it just has to be a name. Usernames can get real weird with emojis and punctuation just in the middle of it, and it's just harder to refer to people as a series of emojis. You're also going to want to hit, yes, usernames with non-letter characters are annoying. However, if you do have a username with a non-letter, like an emoji as like a character, it gets really easy to find your name on paper pairings because you're like, there's the rocket ship, that's me, I'm the rocket ship. But it means that people are like, hey, so is your name like Rocket Jonah, or what's up with that? And you're just like, nah, it's easy to find my name on pairings. But I generally go for full names. For digital events, you might want to use usernames because people are going to be searching each other out via names, and that's primarily how folks are going to be communicating. For the next several checkboxes, enabled draws is important to check. Even though draws are worth 0 match points in Star Wars Unlimited, enabling this enables players to submit a match as a draw. They will still receive 0 match points. If you do not have enabled draws, if it is turned off, you must have a winner or a loser of every single match, which means that if players go to time, they won't be able to submit an accurate result, and so you want to click Enable Draws. You can select Delayed Delivery of Matches and Delayed Delivery of Standings. These are generally better if you're running coverage. Delaying delivery means that you'll be able to see it, you'll be able to look at it, you'll even be able to print it out. And then there's a separate button for publish to the players. It's not on a timer. It just means that you can look at it. If you're concerned about how Melee is going to be pairing things, you can use this. But again, Melee is going to be right and your math is going to be wrong 999 times out of 1,000. I have never seen Melee's math be wrong. I've only seen user errors cause Melee to give a result that the human didn't expect. But delaying delivery of matches is great if you're doing feature matches, because then you can pull up the pairings, figure out what your feature matches are, announce those feature matches, and then publish the pairings and tell the players that it's published. That way, players don't go to their seat, then set up, then be told, hey, you have to move and set up somewhere else. Delaying delivery of standings means that, like, again, if you're having coverage or if you want to do a top 8 announcement before players are able to self-identify, you can check that off, read off your top 8, and then hit publish on standings. As Gentle Giant says, remember to publish it before you tell players that it's published. Finally, you can enable a round timer. This essentially just lets you broadcast a timer to players that you can start and stop independently inside Melee. It's a very useful tool because it allows players to check their phones to see how much time is remaining in the round. If you do this, you're going to want to make sure that the round length is correct. By default, it's set to 50 minutes. For best of 3 Star Wars, you're going to set it to 55. For best of 1, you're going to set it to 25. For this pre-release, let's pretend we're doing best of 1, even though most places do best of 3. But we'll just set that to 25 minutes. Keep in mind that you do have to manually start the timer and reset it every round. And players generally shouldn't be checking their electronic devices during matches, so it's not the most useful tool. However, it means that once somebody finishes a match, they can check their phone and be like, oh, I have 35 minutes until the next round starts. I'm going to go get lunch, and I'll keep my eye on my phone and come back when there's 5 minutes left in the round. I don't need to set a timer or anything like that. With all of these options out of the way, we can go ahead and hit Create Tournament, but we're far from done. Oh no! I have a code! I left it as code only. I didn't put in a code. We're going to just switch to open registration and free, and now we're going to hit create, and we're going to deal with that user error. Alrighty, now we're not done creating the event. I know we've been talking for like 20 minutes about how to create an event. We haven't created the event yet. Before we do that, we're going to have to go to Phase Actions and create a new phase. Before we create a phase, you can find out more information about phases. It's just talking about various types of structure. There's a ton of information in the help docs. They talk about everything. You can see that there's 30, 40, 50, 60 some pages of documentation. Very useful tool. Anyways, we're going to create a phase. A phase is a section of a tournament. You need at least one section. It is what defines the structure of your event. Most of the time, we're just going to go with Swiss matching method. But let's go through this page one step at a time. We're going to begin with a cut. We do not want to start with a cut. We're running a pre-release, and so this phase doesn't start by eliminating any players. If you're moving to a top 8 or a top 16, or you're going to day 2, or there's some other way that you're cutting back on players, then you're going to begin the phase with a cut. For play format, we're going to select sealed because we're playing pre-release, and so our format is sealed. You can also select Premiere, Freeform, Draft. I don't know why there are 2 variants on Draft. That's likely a leftover test item, but I don't know. There might just be 2 different types of draft. In any case, we're just going to go ahead and select sealed. This doesn't change the way anything is this doesn't force people to play sealed. If they show up with a premier deck, the software isn't going to stop them. But what it does do is when they look at their pairings, it'll say phase 1, round 1 sealed, and it will remind them what format they're going to be playing. Matching method, you have several different options. With Swiss is the default way that most tournaments have been paired for quite some time. You're going to be paired against somebody who has a similar win-loss record to you, and no players are eliminated. We also have play until X losses, so it could be as soon as you get 2 losses or 1 loss, you're eliminated. If it's 3 losses, whatever the number is, you just keep on playing matches out of the set number of rounds until you get to the set number of losses, and then you're eliminated from the event. You can also do play until X wins. Play until X wins, rather than eliminating players, qualifies players for the next event. So it could be you have a 9-round tournament, and anybody who gets 7 wins qualifies for day 2, right? Or qualifies for your top cut event. And you just select play until X wins. Any player who gets that number of wins no longer plays in future rounds, and they make whatever cut you have for the final qualification. Playoffs and top cut is single elimination. Round robin, each player plays each other player. If there are more than 8 players, that becomes a real long tournament real fast. So I would select round robin with excruciating caution. But for a pre-release, we're going to just go ahead and select Swiss. Then we have match type. Most of the time, you're going to be best of 1 or best of 3. If you're doing a particularly thorough top 8, you might select best of 5. And if you're playing Lorcana, you might select best of 2. For this event, we gave it a 25-minute timer. We're going to go ahead and select best of 1. Number of rounds, we're going to do a pre-release. We're going to set the number of rounds to 4. We're only doing best of 1, so let's go ahead and give folks 5 rounds to play. Let them play a little bit longer. That sort of thing. Name is a name for the phase. If you want to add more information for your players, you can add a name here, but it's not required. We also have some other useful tools. We have starting table numbers. This is more for larger events where you're running a bunch of events simultaneously in the same space. Your first event might go from table 1 to table 64 because it's 128 players, which means that you would want your second event to start at table 65. Otherwise, people will try and sit in each other's laps, and that gets very crowded very quickly. The other thing you could do is, and this is a little bit weird, but sometimes you have an event that you know you need to place at table 1, and you're not sure how much space it'll take up, but you know it'll take up less than all of the space you have. If you guess and you're like, I think it'll be 64 players or 128 players, so I can put my next event at 65, you might guess wrong and reduce the amount of contiguous space you have, which is relevant for future events. This gets a little bit complicated, but sometimes you want to use an ending table instead of a starting table number, or table sections, that sort of thing. But you really don't need to worry about ending table numbers at your local events. You also have pod sizes. This is for if you wanted to do Twin Suns, or if you wanted to do Draft, you can select 4 or 8. When you select this, if you have Drafts or Twin Suns, it'll create pods for you, which is super handy. No Breaks says, question, if we have 16 seats and say we want 4 rounds of Swiss, is there a way to retroactively change it to 3 rounds if 8 or fewer players show up for an event? Yep, absolutely. So let's say we put in 5 rounds, we hit save, we create the phase, and we have our Swiss phase. I'm gonna jump ahead real quick, and I'm gonna get back to your question in a moment. So once you have your phases, there's my phases, we can just move to enrolling our players. You can enroll players manually here, and there's a lot of things you can do. You can create a new user if somebody doesn't have an account. If they do have an account, you should be able to search for the player by name, email, username, or Discord. If they haven't played in your an event for your organization before, they can only be found by their email. You're going to want to generally have players' emails. I would also, if you're entering a lot of players manually, skip reviewing player details before enrolling. But yeah, to Kel Raylo's question, doing a showdown tomorrow with top cut, so we just make a Swiss phase, then top 4 phase. Yep, absolutely. So let's hop back into our phases real quick. So we have the Swiss phase, then phase actions, create a new phase. We're going to begin this phase with a cut. The cut type is top X or those with X points, whichever is most inclusive, or top X teams or players. We're going to do top X teams or players. We're going to put in 4, and we're going to make our top 8 draft. We're actually going to do actual top 8. It's going to be Swiss, and it's going to be best of 3, and we're going to do 3 rounds. Oh, we're not doing Swiss. We're doing playoffs top cut. Great. And so this will, after, we're going to just go ahead and hit save. And so we have our Swiss phase, and then we have our top 8 playoffs. If we jump to matches, you'll see that we have our 5 rounds go to next phase, and then quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals automatically put together. If you're doing I chose top 8 because I cut to a top 8 draft. Because it's draft, when we get there, it'll create a pod for us. If you're just doing constructed, you won't have to worry about that draft. But yeah, you'll have that phase built in there. You can also add additional phases. I think the most phases I've seen in an event is 5, because it's day 1 is draft into constructed, then a cut. Day 2 is draft, then constructed, and then a cut into top 8. Kel Rilo says, will it auto put the top 8 players into the top cut? Yep, it sure will. It'll absolutely put the top 8 players into the top cut, and it'll keep them seeded and match them appropriately once you get to that phase. And I'm going to leave this tournament structure so we can see that happen when we get there. So, at this point, no breaks, I want to touch on your question that you asked about changing the number. You can always click this little pen on paper icon and just change the number of rounds you have. So you can go ahead, save it as 4 rounds. If we go to our matches, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4 rounds before we cut to our top 8. If I go back to my phases and we do something wild, like put in a 1 here, I want to see what happens. Oh boy, it accepted 41 rounds. We go to our matches. Yep, we're going to play 41 rounds in our 128 player pre-release, and then we're going to cut to top 8, and they're going to play a draft. I would recommend not doing this. Don't do 41 rounds. Yeah, so the sealed into draft is relatively common because draft is generally, this is a tangent and not about Melee at all, but I like talking. Draft is generally considered a more skill testing format, whereas sealed has a lot more luck and variance thrown in, because if you open no good cards, it's very hard to build a good deck. Whereas in draft, if you open a pack that has no good cards, everybody's picking cards out of that packs. I'm going to go ahead and edit this phase before I get banned from Melee, because I enjoy using this tool. We're going to just go back down to 5 rounds. Notably, you can also edit your phases after matches have started. I'll show you this later on, but I've been a part of events where the tournament organizer was like, okay, we're going to have a cap of 256 players or 226 players, so we're going to cap out at 8 rounds, and then only 110 players show up, and so we're running a 7-round event, and we're like, oh, by the way, we're in round 6. We've announced 7 rounds. There are going to be 7 rounds of play, but Melee is still showing 8. So even after you've entered results for multiple rounds, you can still edit the phase. I don't believe you can get rid of rounds that you've already played out and paired, but you can get rid of ones that haven't played out. So if you're like running a tournament and you're like, wait a second, I forgot to have the correct number to edit the number of rounds down, you can do that later on in the day. All right, back to our good friends and players. Right. Enroll players. So you can just search up somebody. Let me see if I can find myself. Nope. Can't find me because I don't think I've ever played a game anywhere, and that might not even be the email that I use on Melee. But you can add players here. You can create new Melee users, and if somebody already has an existing account, so when you try to create a new user, it says, hey, this person already has an account. Or if they're a minor, so under the age of 13, you can create a guest account. You can just generate a new account, and bam, you have an account. What you're going to want to do is send the player portal link to the player so that they can access Melee for this event. Ideally, you just drop it in here, you send the email, they get this information, they can access it. This allows you to generate folks who have lost their account or lost access to their account temporarily, that sort of thing. For this event, rather than enrolling players, I'm just going to cheat here. And where is it under tournament actions? There's a tool for me. I've seen it before. Come on. Is it under tournament actions for enroll test players? Or is it just at the top of player actions? There it is. Thank you. I'm blind. Nope. Great. Enroll test players. We're going to do that. And now we have a bunch of funny names. We have Hollywood. We have Harley Quinn. We have guest XMY949425. We have Mark Post. All sorts of... We have both Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse and Modest Mouse. We have a bunch of names in here. These names are somewhat I believe these are somewhat intentionally designed names so that you can see how player sorting works, how the multiple mouses work. The reason I think that this isn't a public set of names is because of Steve Port. This is story time. If we jump to the About Us, Steve Port is one of the founders and board members of Melee. This is the Melee team here, all 7 of them. It's a relatively small team working on this. But yeah, Steve Port being one of the randomly generated names in every test event makes me think that they created this rather than pulling from a larger database. Anyways, we now have a bunch of players. This means that we're ready to start running an event. You can do a bunch of stuff from here. You can, on the players list, check the status of players and change the status. But what we're going to do is we're just going to hop straight into matches. We're in round 1. We're going to go to match actions, and we're just going to go ahead and click match players and teams. We give it a second, and our round is matched, and we have pairings for every player. This is now publicly available. Players will be able to check this on their player controller. So at this point, as a judge, we're going to talk about some stuff on this matches screen. This is where you're going to spend most of your time as a judge, because this is where you're going to see most information that you need, and most of the tools that you need are here. One of the first things I do is I go to visibility and change what is displayed. A lot of this information isn't useful for me, and a lot of it is useful. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to go to column visibility. The table number, super important to me. Pod number, not important unless we're doing a draft, so we're going to make sure that that's turned off. I want the player names because I want to know how to refer to people, or if I'm taking a call and I'm like, hey, I need to issue a penalty, what's your name? They're like, my name's Raygun. I'm like, cool, I need to be able to see your name to remember it. Once digital deck lists are enabled, you'll probably want to have deck lists enabled just so you can check players' deck lists, but you don't need to have that now. Published, you don't need that. That's just the pairings have been published. Everything's going to be published at the same time. Reported, you don't super need that. It just lets you know if their match results have been reported, so I'm going to turn that off. Match type and format are, is it a best of 3, best of 1, Premier, sealed, draft, etc. Again, you probably don't need this information because you know this. Gentle Giant says, I assume Melee doesn't take SWU deck list yet. Correct, it does not. It also doesn't take Lorcana deck lists, and they've had a partnership with Lorcana for much longer than they've had a partnership with Star Wars, so I wouldn't hold my breath. I know that I would love it to be implemented. It's a very powerful tool because it means that everybody is submitting a legal deck list. It'll be like, hey, you're running 4 copies of Vader. That doesn't work. Or that sort of thing. It just knows deck legality because it's hard-coded in, and so if you register 47 cards or 4 copies of a card, it'll just send the player alert and be like, hey, you can't submit this deck list, which cuts down on illegal decks by a huge amount. And if somebody's like, hey, I'm playing R2-D2, it'll be like, cool, which R2-D2 are you playing? There are a couple of them. Pick the correct one. Loss reason, you don't need. Result, I like to have just to be able to confirm with players. Feature match, I don't need. Time extension, I like having. End of round, time extended, and staff assigned, I don't need, but they can be helpful if you're running end around. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply, and this is what I'll see. It's a little bit narrower on my phone, but we have, so CapApp says Ross Geller and Sandy Beach don't show up. How do we repair without issue? So my recommendation is if players don't show up, generally just let it slide. Sometimes no-shows happen. What a lot of places do is they pre-register and have players check in. And so under players, when somebody enrolls, they're marked as pre-registered or unenrolled. And then you show up, talk to the staff at the counter of your store, and they bump you up to enrolled. And then that makes sure that everybody is present before the event begins. If you don't go through that process, you might have some no-shows. So step 1 is actively enroll everybody at your event rather than assuming people will be there, because a lot of people somebody might pre-register for a pre-release, and then the night of their dog is feeling sick or their car breaks down or one of a million reasons they don't go to the store. And so having in-store enrollment to make sure people are added to the event is a great way to prevent this sort of thing. If you want to, what you can do is, let's say Ross Geller and Sandy Beach don't show up. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to match actions and edit matchups. Don't mess with this unless you know what you're doing. So we know that Ross Geller isn't here. We're going to break this match. So we're just going to click these X's to remove these players from events. And then Sandy Beach. Sandy Beach and Hugh DeMann also aren't here. So with Sandy, we can use this red button, this last one, to drop this team player. And with Ross, we'll also drop them. Now, we can just select a player over here, double click them, and it will assign them to a match. If you assign a player to a match, and they are not assigned an opponent, and you run the round, it will show them as winning games, but it will not award them the match. So you want to make sure that they have an opponent. So we'll select the match, and then we'll just double click on Joe, and Joe King will now be playing Hugh DeMann at table 4. This is also where you can award buys or award loss. So, for example, if Joe was also late to the event, so Hugh DeMann shows up. If we leave Hugh DeMann has no opponent. If we leave Hugh DeMann here and run the event, at the end of the event, this will not count as a match win for Hugh DeMann. So what we're going to want to do is remove Hugh DeMann from the event and say, Hugh DeMann, we're going to award you a bye. This is different than a no opponent match. Do not give players no opponent matches. It will not do what you want it to do. If you want the player to win the match, give them a win. Joe King shows up 30 minutes into round 1 and is like, hey, sorry, my car broke down, so I just left it on the side of the highway and ran the rest of the way here. Can I play? And you're like, absolutely, but I can't get you in for round 1. You're going to have to take a round 1 loss. We can add Joe King to the event, and Joe King is assigned a loss. And then we can go ahead, hit save. It'll tell us what is changing to our matches. We can go ahead and click yes. Hugh DeMann awarded the bye. Joe King forfeited the match. something that is another hugely powerful tool that I am so far from a master of is going up to the audit logs. The audit logs will show you everything you've done with your event from after you created it. So it shows that I've created an account, I've enrolled players, generated pods, so much. Like, you can filter events and by timestamp. For my tournament, there are a couple columns here. So you can find anything that happened in your event. If you're checking to see, hey, what happened, you can go in here and find that event. If you're like, hey, for my tournament report, I found out when we printed or published pairings for each round simply by going into the audit log for the event and selecting, I think it was matches published. Does that sound right? That sounds right. Hit apply. Nope, nothing was under matches published because that's different than match updated. Is that what we were looking for? Anyways, again, clearly not a master here, but you can find anything that you want that happened in the event in here and check to see what happened, who did it, when they did it, the exact details of that. It'll show you who dropped which players, if a result was entered, who entered those results. Everything is in here. If we jump back to our matches, we now have a couple of tools. We can start entering results. So you can pull up this large event entry or results entry tab. I would just click over. If you're sitting at a scorekeeping station, this is how I'd use it. I'd filter out reported matches. When somebody says, hey, I want a match, I'd be like, okay, what's your name? They're like, my name's Peg. You can either visually find them or you can just short type it in there. And here you're going to be able to, you'll see the table number. You'll be able to report their results. Peg wins 2-0 and we'll hit submit. It's a couple of clicks, but you can also just pour stuff over from here. I think there is a way. Where's my button? I know that there's a button that has hotkeys for this so that you can do this with fewer mouse clicks and more keyboard clicks. But rather than entering all of this data manually, I'm just going to go ahead and enter test results, as I believe I've demonstrated how you can edit result or enter results. So you can either enter them from results entry over there in the upper corner, or you can just find a table, hit this little gear, and hit edit match result. And you can enter the result for that particular match relatively easily. It's going to have a slightly different UI on mobile, but it means that as a judge, you can go out on the floor and enter match results for players. I strongly encourage you to have players enter their match results themselves. If they make an error, it is better than you making an error, just due to the simple responsibility of it. If you make an error and it damages somebody's tournament, that is on you. If a player makes an error, that is on them. If you do enter match results, verify with their opponent and with both players what the match result is. So Toxic Crane says, what would it look like with a double loss entering it into Melee? Do you mean for a draw when players go to time and both players receive 0 match points? And CapApp says, can you go over the correct way to report draw results? Like if a player wins game 1, then they time out on game 2, etc. Okay, so if I win game 1 and you win game 2, and then we are about to start game 3 when time is called, we do not report that, and we report that as 1-1. So we're going to just give each player a win, and then we're going to hit submit. My computer's going to lag a little bit. A 1-1-0 draw. If we are in the middle of game 3, when time is called and we are unable to finish it, that will be 1, 1, and 1. This is also going to be a draw. If we're in the middle of game 2, and Dandelion won game 1, and Jane Doe won no games, we're going to submit it as 1-0. And Dandelion won as expected. So you record the number of games each player won, and then you record the number of games that were drawn. And Melee takes care of the rest and assigns the correct match results for them. If we hop over to standings, it's not going to show us anything. Let's see. Yeah, it's not going to show us standings until everybody is reported for a round. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly just enter test results, which will give a bunch of results everywhere else. Tennessee Feet Monk says, a game starts when the first action is taken post-mulligans. That is my understanding, yes. So if players are still in mulligans, about to start game 3 when time is called, that game does not occur. It's also exceptionally unlikely, and it feels like a waste of everybody's time for people who are like, even if we're just like, okay, you get to play a turn in an action phase, I can't think of a deck that can do 25 damage in a turn in an action phase. And so it seems like a waste of everybody's time. If you go to game 3 and you're shuffling up, the match is over. So Cap App, what you report is the number of games won by each player, and then there is a line entry for the number of drawn games. So if we have completed 2 games and not played a third game at all, we report 0 drawn games and one game. 1 game won by each player. I know they're homophones. They sound similar. I hope that's being clear. If we're not in 2 games, we're simply going to go in. Yeah, so if the third game didn't even start, 1-1-0. If the second game did not finish, then it's 1-0-1. This is weird because I made it a best of 1 tournament, and that's not useful information for us, so I'm going to go back to my phases and switch it to best of 3, because then I can actually show you drawn matches and it makes a little bit more sense. Let's go back to our matches. We're just going to delete these round 1 matches because it's not showing us useful data. Don't hit this button unless you really, really mean it. That'll show up here, and we can see that Jonah Muskrat deleted the matches at 5:53. Kel Rilo, so anything that goes to time is a draw. Not necessarily. It depends on where you are in the match. So let's go back to our matches. We're going to match players and teams real quick. So we're going to go over a bunch of different scenarios. Let's go here. All right. Edit match result. Our guest wins game 1. They are playing game 2 when time is called, and by the end of their extra round and action phase, no player wins the game. That is going to be 1 game won by guest, 0 games won by Captain Hook, and 1 drawn game. And so we're going to submit as 1-0-1. Guest wins that match. I'm going to get to your question in a second, Tennessee Feet Monk. Now we have another situation. We play game 1. Time is called during game 2. And by the time the round and action phase are completed, mark post wins. We're going to submit that as 1-1. That's going to be a 1-1 draw. Similarly, if we're playing, Batman wins game 1, Dan Druff wins game 2, and time is called during game 3, and neither player wins during the turn and action phase, we're going to submit 1 draw, and it'll be a 1-1-1 draw. If Dan wins game 1 and Steve wins game 2, and then in game 3, time is called, they play their round and then another action phase, and Steve wins that game at that point in time, we submit a 2-1. So many matches that go to time will result in draws, but not necessarily if one player has won more games than the other. Why were 2 players assigned the bye? That is a wonderful question. Let's see what I can find out. let's go to edit matchups. I don't know why it was were assigned buys. So what I'm going to do is I can take these two players, add one to a match, select the match, add their opponent to that match. Come on. That's interesting. It doesn't want to assign them to that match. Interesting. So the challenge with deviating from what Melee says is that I'm, again, not an expert in Melee, but if you deviate from what Melee says, then let's say you match them, you're not going to be able to put in match results for them that match the actual match results, and so it may affect standings later on. So what I'm going to try and do here is I'm going to remove Peter Griffin, see if I can add John Smith to that match, then create a match for Peter Griffin, add Robin Banks to that. Great, Robin Banks can go into that match. Now if I can pull Robin Banks out, and who is my other problem child? It was John Smith. So actually we want to add here. It's a little bit of a clunky workaround. We add John Smith in, we take Rachel out, we add Robin Banks. They're appropriately paired. Rachel and Peter, who were initially paired against each other, are still paired against each other. And so we have players paired against each other. It took me a minute to figure out how to do it in the back end. CapApp, it probably was a result of deleting round 1 results and making round 1 a best of 1, then switching it to a best of 3. I'm doing some weird stuff with Melee that you would not do in a real event. You would not create a bunch of pairings, run around, get results, and then change it from best of 1 to best of 3. However, there is a way to fix it, and we have a viable tournament. Those two players probably should have been paired against each other. They're now paired against each other. But let's go ahead and enter test results. And now we have a bunch of results. We have a bunch of results are great. We can now go ahead and look at standings, and we can see all of the standings for all of our players. We can see that our players who have had, let's see, who did we give draws to? I know we gave some draws to some folks. Oh, they're going to be on page 2, right, because there's a second page of results. And so you'll note that we have some folks with some draws. And we can see everybody's results. Fantastic. So now that we have the results, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to click over to round 2, match actions, match players and teams. You're going to want to move to the appropriate round. If you try and, say, set up rounds early, so round 3, match players and teams, you're not going to be able to do it because it's not the current round. It seems like this issue with players double getting assigned buys is going to be persistent in this buggy tournament that we've created. This is my fault, not the software's. I've done some weird stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, edit matchups. Let's pull out Jack Pot, Joe King, and Jack Sparrow. And then add everybody to the correct matches. We want to make sure that Jackpot and Mickey Mouse are still paired together because they have the same number of match points. We don't want to pair them against Jack Sparrow and Joe King because they both have 0 match points, and we're doing Swiss pairings, and so we want to make sure everybody has the appropriate match points when we sit them down for a match. I'm going to go ahead and hit save here. We're probably going to have this issue for the rest of the event. Something that you can do is go ahead and hit view matchdowns. This will show you players who have match points playing against players who have 0 match points. We have also created this as a podded event, which I think is because I, again, did weird stuff during creation, switched from draft and that sort of thing, which means players are playing within their own pods. And so we're going to have more than the usual number of match downs, where a player with a higher record is playing against somebody with a lower record. And that's something that you can fix if you have this weird structure. I would probably just not include the draft until the later portion of the event and just set it up there. But we're going to just go ahead and blitz through the next few rounds. We're going to put in results. And then give it a second because it takes a moment to think. We're going to refresh the page. Go to matches. Round 3. Match players and teams. It's going to think. We're going to enter some test results. Nilrim says, this was a nightmare for me to learn at the Kansas City Planetary Qualifiers. Head judge, but I worked through it. Very insightful what you're showing. And Tennessee Feet Monk said, we had a dedicated scorekeeper who was very familiar in Dallas. Saved my bacon since the switch a week or two beforehand didn't give me time to learn. Yeah. So what I'm teaching you is more than sufficient for what you should need to know. As a judge, generally you'll be responsible for running Melee for a store-level casual tier event. So that's weekly play, showdown, or a pre-release. For larger events like Planetary Qualifiers, they should be bringing in a scorekeeper or having somebody on their staff who understands how the software works. While a lot of the scorekeeping job is done by the computer, when something breaks, like Hugh DeMann and Peter Pan getting these buys. Oh, I figured out why they're getting buys. It's important to have somebody who understands how Melee works and can fix it. So that you can actually run the event. The reason why we're getting all of these buys in every round is because the pod size has been set to 4. What that means is that it is pairing people within each pod, and because of the number of players we have a couple of pods with 3 players, and the software doesn't want to pair people outside of their pods. So again, because I was doing weird things, weird stuff is happening. So don't select pod size. I don't know how you can delete it. Can I make it 32? Nope, it's 4/8, and can I select that? Great. Fantastic. Now that I fixed that, let's delete the rounds matches and create the matches again. Did I solve it? Haha! We don't have any buys. I solved it. It was because they were in pods. So, there's always a solution. If there's something weird happening, it's probably because the user did something weird. And now if we check view matchdowns, because we're not podded, we only have 2 matchdowns. 1 2-1 and 1 1-0. The software could have paired Guest and Captain Hook against each other, and we would have then only had 1 pair down. But then Brock Lee would have been playing Phoebe Buffet, which means that we have a 2-0 playing against the 0-2, and it would rather have 2 one-step pair downs than 1 two-step pair down, if that makes sense. It wants to minimize the magnitude of pair downs, then minimize the number of pair downs. This is more like what we expected. So, great. Now that I've solved that, we're going to enter some results. Move to the next round. Go ahead and hit refresh. Go to our matches. Pod setting during setup was in the creation of the phase. Pod size is optional. You'll want to do this for drafts. Let's say you have 15 players show up for a weekly draft. You're going to want to just drop in 8 there, and it will try to optimize for 8 players. I recommend using 8 players for, if you don't have enough players, it'll do its best to give you good pods. Generally, the way pod math works is you never want a pod smaller than 6, because a 5-player draft is miserable experience for everybody. And you never want a pod greater than 11, because as soon as you get to 12, you'll just have 2 pods of 6. Your ideal, of course, is 8, so it'll try and generate as many 8-player pods as it can. And at some point, we can go over, like, large-scale tournament pod creation. The worst number of players to have, I believe, is 49, because that'll generate 7 pods of 7. Because if you do pods of 8, you'll have 6 pods of 8 and 1 leftover player, so you can't do that. And the best it can do is 7 pods of 7. And so everybody is miserable if you have 49 players and you're doing multiple draft pods. So just get a 50th player, and then you can have a bunch of pods of 8, and everybody's a lot, like, you have 8s and 6, and it's just so much better than 7s. Anyways, let's go back to our matches. Let's talk about what we can do here, other than pairing stuff. So, we go to round 4. We're going to match players again. We're going to talk about some other buttons. We have paper printing. You can print out everything you want here. So at the top, let's talk about letter ranges for a second. This is something that you'll never have to do at your local store, but it's a good thing to know about, and I like chatting. So you can, if you have a huge event with, say, 1,800 players, some of those players, even in this digital age where most people are checking their phones for pairings, some of those players are going to want to check the paper pairings, or they're going to want to check paper standings, that sort of thing. So if you have 1,800 players, with a roughly 40, I think it's around 40 or 45 names per page, 1,800 players is, let's call it 45, that's, what, times 2 is 90, times 2 again is 180, times 10, that's 40 sheets of paper. Having that just in one contiguous range is going to be a lot of paper. So what you can do is put in 4 ranges, and Melee will automatically balance by last name how many, like, it'll try and make sure by starting letter of last name, how many players are in each group. And so in this tiny event, we're going to have a page with 9 players, 10 players, 7 players, and 12 players. If you have 1,800 players, it'll do this math for you automatically. It's super handy. For this, we don't need to do that, so we're just going to leave it as 1. But you can print out letter ranges, which are cover sheets for, like, last name A to Z, last name whatever. You can print out a list of players by name, player meeting by name or table, draft pods, draft pod slips, build seats for deck construction for sealed events, because for many sealed events, the way it works, at least in Magic competitive level, is you open your packs, reveal them to somebody sitting across from you. That person registers them, so you can't register your own cards and avoid being able to cheat in that way. It's then returned to you, and then you go build somewhere else. Or you build there, draft, you build somewhere else. Pairings by name and pairings by table. Having pairings by name, super helpful for players. Having pairings by table is super helpful if you're looking for no-shows. If you have a huge event with, say, 256 players, going down the list and being like, all right, I'm at table 17, your name is James, okay, well that means Katie is missing here, that means Katie is a no-show, and you can write that down, and just going down pairings by table is super handy. Random tables is a tool used for deck checks. You'll just print out a list of random tables, and you'll pick 1 or 2 or 10 of them and be like, that's who we're deck checking. You'll check more at a larger event. At a smaller event, picking 1 is reasonable. But it gives you, there's some randomization in there, so it's not targeted decks that you're checking unless you need to target them. Result slips allow you to have printed out slips that folks can enter, and then you input the results by hand. Again, I strongly encourage digital results entry. 1, because it's the player entering it themselves. 2, it's on their phone and their opponent's phone, and people are more easily able to verify it. During my time when I was handling paper match slips, particularly at larger events, there would relatively regularly be an incorrectly entered match result, and it was frequently just due to somebody entering a bunch of match results and clicking incorrectly or typing incorrectly. That number, the number of incorrectly entered match results, has dropped dramatically now that players are doing it themselves, because while the scorekeepers are experts, the players are deeply, deeply invested because, well, it's their match and they care about it. Standings, of course, is a ranking of all players in the event. Active player standings is all players still enrolled and active in the event. This is, again, important for those massive events. If you have a 2,000 player tournament and you're publishing standings of everybody's ranking, let's say the event pays down to top 128 and day 2 was around 300 players. Printing out 40 pages of standings so that the person who went 0-3 drop on Friday can see where they came in place on Sunday evening isn't super helpful. The relevant standings are those for players still in the event, generally speaking, and so printing active player standings allows people to see where they are among players still in the event. So if you've already left the event, you probably don't care about your standings and you don't need to see that. You can add a bunch of things. You can add items multiple times, and you can arrange the order in which various documents will come off the printer. If the first thing you need is random tables, and you want 2 copies of it, but you don't need the second copy until everything else has gone out, you can put 1 random tables at the top, 1 at the bottom, and then you can print all, and Melee will send 1 big old command to your printer, and it'll print all of it. Multi-print is an incredible tool, and again, you probably won't need to use it at the local level. What else do we have? So yeah, we can edit matchups, view match downs. You can export the entire tournament's matches, either to CSV or JSON. Doing this every round is something that I strongly encourage. Just having the CSV is a super useful piece of data. It means that you're able to reconstruct the event in case something goes wrong. You have that data available to you. What other tournament actions do we have? We can also... deck list printing is a great tool. Once we have digital deck lists. We don't currently have digital deck lists, but it allows you to pull up a player by their name and just hit print on their deck list. If players need to exchange deck lists, you'll be able to just print out a second copy of a deck list and hand it to somebody. Although once we have digital deck lists, players will also be able to view their opponent's deck lists on their phones. Now, there's more that you can do over here. We've done edit match result. We can also hit enter penalty. This lets us select an infraction for a player. Let's go ahead and say John Smith was committed a minor gameplay error. We include a penalty. Chandler, no infraction, no penalty. And Miss Gideon Hask trigger. And it took us 2 minutes to figure out what happened and resolve it, so we go ahead, add 2 minutes, go ahead and hit submit. That will create a time extension that'll show up there once we refresh the page, and it creates a penalty that we can check out. You can note here that the 2-minute time extension exists. You can also just type in a number and hit the little save icon, and it'll update the time extension. This means that you can communicate with other judges how much time a match has. If we go into John Smith and we have to enter another penalty again, it'll show us what penalty John Smith has accrued and when they accrued it, so you can keep track of penalties somebody has earned, and you can simply just add on to the time extension here. Beyond that, you can also look at any player. Let's go ahead and look at John Smith. We have a bunch of information about the user, including contact information, their status in the event. If you need to fix a table for a player, if somebody has limited mobility or they need to be near somebody. I know some people have service animals, and making sure that the dog is able to be in an aisle that is not blocked is very important. Some people have crutches and they're like, hey, I'd rather not have to move across this event hall every round. Can you just put me at a single table? You can just type that in here, and that player will be at that table for the duration of the event. You can also use this to drop and no-show players. I recommend instead going to their status and switching them to drop by staff and just managing it directly there. You can also see a bunch of data about the player. You can see any support tickets they filed, the deck list they've submitted, the pod that they're in, seedings, match results, standings by round. So like if somebody's like, hey, I won this match in this round and it's not showing up, you can check that information there. You can see penalties that were issued. You can check to see if they entered payment, if there were uploaded files, if those are required for the event. There is a ton of information in here. The seedings, matches, and standings is most of the value here. Nilrem, you're saying there's a hidden menu there under the player where you drop. It should be known. What are you talking about? Because I want to make sure that we get this correct. I am very cautious about dropping players. I think hitting double no-show on match results is an issue. I think hitting... Yeah. When you drop a player, make sure that they are unenrolled from the event. The best way to do that is just going into the status and changing it directly. Drop and no-show can be a little weird. Yeah, I would just go here, hit unenrolled, and hit save, and this player is no longer going to be playing in our event. John Smith should not show up in pairings next round. Let's go ahead and match players and teams once we've submitted results. And yeah, we now have our players without our good friend John Smith. Generally, if you're the judge, ask the scorekeeper to drop players or tell players to drop themselves. On their player controller, there's a button that says drop. Interesting, Nilrim, that you had to manually type it in. I don't know why that is. I don't know what settings I have that let me see more roles than you do. So we can check out all of our matches. We can start the round timer each page. I haven't done that for any of these rounds because I've just forgotten. You have a bunch of other tools that you can do. You can send out announcements to each player. It won't send them a notification. It'll just show up in their player controller with no fanfare. I believe that Melee is working on an app that will notify players and send them notifications on their phone, and so this sort of thing will be more prominent and more useful. If you go to your players, you can see the status of all of your players. You can see when they were dropped, how they were dropped, and that sort of thing. Yeah, making sure that you are aware of all of the various options for status enrollment is important. Unenrolled is the big one. Qualified, pre-registered, no-show. No-show don't no-show people. That sometimes does some weird things with regards to dropping them. Just go ahead and have them mark as dropped. Again, the best thing for them to do is to go into their player controller and hit drop themselves. Now, we're in round 5. This is right before our cut. We're going to go ahead and enter some test results to demonstrate how we go through the cut. And then I think we're going to be able to wrap stuff up relatively shortly. It didn't like entering match results. Alright, so we have our match results for round 5. If we check standings, we have Chandler, Stan, Brock, Mickey, Minnie, Jack, Modest, and Peter as our top 8. This is based on tiebreakers. It looks like, oh, that's unfortunate. Joey and Peter have the same opponent match win percentage, and so we're going to look at total game win percentage, and Peter wins just a couple more games than Joey, or lost fewer games. Now that we've completed this, we're going to go ahead and click go to next phase. This is going to cut, and it's going to give us our top 8. So now we can go to our quarterfinals and match players. And This should match our top 8. We go to matches, we go to next phase. Fantastic. So we now have our matches, and if we go to our standings for round 5, our 1 seed Chandler should be playing against Peter Pan. Our 7 seed Modest Mouse should be playing against Stand Up. And there we go. Our 1 is playing against 8. Our 2 is playing against 7, etc., etc. And now we have our top 8. We can go ahead and enter match results. Go to the semifinals and create matches. Something to note is that if somebody on Melee's backend, so a non-player, submits the final result, it will take a minute or so for the standings to update. So if I submit a result, it will take a little bit of time for the standings to be calculated, and you'll have to go ahead and recalculate standings after waiting about a minute, which is another reason why players should be submitting their match results. For whatever architectural reason, when a player submits their match result, it prompts the server and software to recalculate standings and lets it do so immediately. Whereas if somebody who has admin access submits matches or submits match results, it takes a little bit more time. We're going to go ahead, enter test results, and you can see that it is in this state correctly dropping players as they are eliminated from the event. But that pretty much rounds up what I have to talk about. This tool is incredibly powerful. You can add other members to your staff and change their responsibilities and access to the event. You can handle pre-registrations, as I mentioned, announcements. Players on the side of their app or their web page will have a little bar that says submit a support ticket, and they'll be able to submit tickets here, and so you can check that information out here. You're able to look at all of your players with a bunch of information around them, and of course, as always, there are more columns that you can find. If you're doing something online, you can look for Twitch. If it's multi-language, you can check off language. There's a ton of very powerful tools here, and that's just within an event itself. If we go to your organization, if you're a part of an organization, you can have members of your staff. You can have players that play in your events regularly. I don't have any real players, so I'm not going to have anybody show up here. Under staff permissions, you can change what people of varying tiers are able to do. You can suspend players from your events, and so you can just be like, I don't want this user in my event anymore. They're not healthy for my store. You can check out player penalties, where it will show every penalty you've ever submitted for every player in your organization. This isn't cross-organization at this point in time because that gets into privacy issues, but I can see that in my previous test event, I issued John Smith a minor gameplay error, and in the next one at the pre-release, I also issued John Smith a minor gameplay error. This gives me some information in investigations, and it's something that you can do. You can reach out to and talk to your tournament organizer if you're like, hey, I have some concerns about this player. I want to talk to them a little bit. Do you have any history on them? And you can be like, well, this player's gotten 17 penalties for this issue before. And so you can pull that information up. And you can pull up, I believe, the information for that player for that event, including the description of the penalty. So, incredibly powerful tool. There's in-store programs for other games. There's documentation. There's a lot going on here. Anyways, that's going to cut back to me. I've been talking for about an hour and a half now on Melee, and honestly, kind of just scratching the surface. I deeply, deeply encourage you to jump in, start playing around. If you just hit buttons and try and do weird things, weird stuff will happen, as we saw with the pods being a little weird and pairings being a little weird because of that. There are also a couple other weird things that happened that I didn't have an answer for, and eventually we found the answer, and the answer was I, the scorekeeper, did something weird. Melee was acting as expected with those weird parameters. And so spending some time in Melee and making sure you understand it so when something goes wrong you can solve it is super helpful. It does help that I've been judging for a decade now, and so I've talked with a bunch of scorekeepers, and so when I was like, oh, there are a bunch of pair downs and it's showing me pods, I probably created pods even though I didn't mean for this to be a podded event. And so that sort of experience allows me to find the issue, track it down, and adjust it, because I just have experience with events. Over time, as you get exposure to events and you get to play around with Melee a little bit more, you'll become more comfortable with it. Deeply, deeply encourage you to create some test events, play around with it. If you have anything weird come up, bring it up in the Discord, ask some people, show some links, and I'm going to hang out for another minute, as always, to see if anybody has any questions. But other than that, thank you for joining me, and we'll be back next week on Tuesday going over lesson number 17, which is going to be running your first event. It's going to put together rules knowledge, policy knowledge, logistics. It's going to be more logistics focused because, like, I'm not going to explain how to answer specific rules calls, especially given that on Monday we talked about how do you handle taking a call in general. Tennessee Feet Monk says, off topic, for the Galactic Championship, has Cascade already reserved a block of rooms for a group rate for selected judges or planning to reserve a block? Cascade, to the best of my knowledge, has not yet been asked to staff judges for that event. I don't know who's running it. It may end up being Cascade. It may not be Cascade. So we definitely haven't reserved a room block yet because we have not yet been asked to run that event. I don't know when that's going to happen. Kelrilo says, thanks for this. This will help me a lot tomorrow. I sure hope it does. If you have any questions, there is, under ongoing tournament calls in the Discord, a tournament software live channel. However, even more helpful than that, go to Melee's Discord, discord.melee.gg. That'll link you to their Discord. They provide not quite 24/7 service, but they are incredibly active in there, and they are actually experts in Melee, whereas I and the other judges are not. So absolutely, if you're ever going to be scorekeeping, join the Melee Discord. Members of their staff, the folks on this About Us page that we're going to cut back to, these folks, like the programmers and the founders and the people who have been living and working with this product for actual years, will answer your question within minutes. They are an incredibly, incredibly valuable resource, and if you ever have any questions about how does something work for an ongoing tournament, go to their Melee and ask for help. If you go to their customer service, contact us, it'll be like, you can send us an email and we'll get back to you eventually, or you just shoot us a message on Discord and we'll get back to you today, because they just have that sort of responsiveness. Tennessee Feet Monk says, what is the status on the L1 test since we're a week away from the target? So, uncertain. The test itself is in a good shape. I've started developing the questions. I'm trying to get a larger question pool for L1 just so that everybody isn't served the same 25 questions. I'd like to have at least 50 questions, if not 75, which is a bit of an ambitious goal. The current blocker that we're facing is getting the endorsements to happen. So we have a bunch of stuff that we're trying to get to come together simultaneously. As I mentioned earlier this week, we've updated the website. Earlier this week we had profile privacy settings updated, so now you can share your profile with somebody. That is a precursor to a judge search tool being available, and once that's available, we'll be able to have tournament organizers endorse judges, which is a prerequisite for level 1. Now we hit a roadblock, which is we don't currently have a list of verified tournament organizers. We're working with FFG to get access to a list that will allow us to just be like, yep, you're a tournament organizer. We don't have to do a bunch of extra work to verify that you're actually a tournament organizer or a store. We're working on other methods in case we're not able to get that information soon, but that is currently our largest roadblock. It's possible we'll have some system wherein tournament organizers can reach out to us, we'll verify them, and then they'll be able to endorse a judge candidate. However, every step that we ask stores and tournament organizers to make makes it one step harder and that much more difficult for a judge candidate to be able to take the test and advance to level 1. And so we want to make sure that when we initially release this project, we have the smallest number of hurdles for both judge candidates and endorsers to go through, so that it doesn't have leave a bad feeling in people's mouths and just being like, I had to do all this make work. Once we have that, we'll have the test created. We're also working on developing a testing platform to be built directly into Nexus rather than using Google Docs. We previously, obviously, for the Judge Apprentice level, we used Google Docs and Google Forms, and that means that I have to then manually update everybody's level. We're working on, as mentioned, developing on-platform testing. However, one, that needs to be built. That's complex. 2, it would in theory allow us to build 2 things into it automatically, one of which is cooldowns, meaning that after you take the test, we can say, hey, congratulations, you've taken the test. If you passed, welcome to level 1. If you failed, please wait N months until taking the test again, and build that cooldown into the software so that you can't just spam the test, and I don't have to manually verify it. We can also build a timer into the test, which is something that we are planning on doing for our tests. Our ideal for testing is open book timed tests. This more accurately represents what you'll be doing on the floor of an event. You do need to be considerate of the time a call takes, and you're allowed to look at the comprehensive rules, at the tournament regulations, master event doc, during a judge call. So why wouldn't you be allowed to do that during a judge test? So depending on where the technology is, it is possible that the test will be timed. It's possible that the test initially will not be timed, and then after it's released and has been out for a while, it will become a timed test as we move it on to Nexus. The end state is all tests are timed. Tennessee Feet Monk says, are you accepting input or is that COL? I'm not sure what you mean by COL, but if you're talking about test questions and that sort of thing, that has to be entirely internal. Any questions that anybody gives us is providing value to us. If somebody submits a question to us and we use that, somebody has provided value to us, a for-profit organization, and that is called work, and we need to pay you for it. And so we cannot accept external questions, unfortunately. It does mean more work that I have to do, but I do enjoy this work, and it means that I'm going to be able to have a holistic sense of the questions. Unfortunately, we're not able to afford to pay you the amount that we think you are owed, and that is not something that we're going to compromise on. If we wanted to, if we stretched our morals, we could say, hey, here's a bunch of work that needs to be done. We need these lessons created. We need lessons on all of these rules, on all of these interactions. If we could have a video on every weird interaction that Crate Traction has, or Lurking TIE Phantom, or Chirrut, like, I am positive that the community would give us, if I said, hey, if anybody wants to create a question for the judge test, we'll take them for free, or for an unreasonably low price, I would get hundreds, if not thousands, of questions. However, that doesn't, like, it's not even the legality of it that doesn't sit well with me. Like, we're required to pay you for the work that you do, but also morally, I feel like I should compensate you for the work that you do for us. I know that you want to help us. I know that you want to help us grow. Not you specifically, but to anybody who's like, hey, why aren't you accepting volunteer labor? The answer is, we think that we should pay you for the work that you're doing, and right now we can't afford to do that. And it's not just because of the legal requirements. It's because of personal moral requirements. So I appreciate the thought for anybody who's like, I would love to contribute actively to the program and help build it up. If we're ever in a position where we're expanding the team, I am confident that we will look to the community first. We want people who are judges and people who love the game to be building this leadership and building the content for this, because we care about the way the game works. The feedback lesson that I was about to reference hasn't come out yet. It won't come out till Thursday. But the point is that we want people who are deeply invested to be contributing to it. You clearly are, if you want to contribute to it. But we don't think that there's a way that we can do that that also lines up with our personal ethical requirements. And also, like, the test isn't, like, the questions aren't the blocker in this. It is technical requirements and interfacing with a variety of other organizations. And I don't know if there's anybody who can help with licensing and that sort of labyrinthine sort of thing. Please, I understand that you're joking, but I'm going to take this seriously because I have to. Please, no under the table questions to my Gmail address. I can't accept those, and I would not feel comfortable accepting them. I know you're joking, but as I said, I think in the Discord yesterday, and this is something that I'm going to repeat a lot, in my role, I'm going to very often believe that people are joking, but I'm going to respond seriously most of the time, because if somebody they raise a concern and I think they're joking, I would rather take a joke seriously than mock a real concern. Similarly, if somebody makes a suggestion that is a joke, that may be harmful, I want to address it seriously, as opposed to playing into the joke. Please continue to joke. That's entirely fine. I'm going to continue to respond as though you are not joking, because not necessarily everybody will pick up on the context that you're joking. We have a bunch of folks here who don't have English as their first language, and I think it's just important to maintain that attitude of treating everything with respect. I'm going to be a little bit more respectful with this because I need to remain professional to a degree. I mean, sure, I'm living in a, toy chest filled with all sorts of nerdy stuff, but I'm still going to treat people's feelings and emotional spaces and work and that sort of thing very seriously. But yeah, test is on course. I don't believe, unless something changes, it is very unlikely to release on Thursday. We have updated our language from end of October to end of October, early November. And I am still optimistic and believe in that happening. I just need to line up a few ducks and make sure everything happens. What I do not want to do is release the L1 test, let a bunch of people take the test, and then say, okay, now you have to go find an endorsement, or else you don't get your certification. The endorsement is an important part of the certification. And if somebody takes the test but doesn't get an endorsement, I think it is much more likely that they will feel entitled to be a level 1 judge. And some people might even start being like, yeah, I'm a certified level 1 judge, it just hasn't shown up on my profile yet for whatever reason. And forget that the endorsement, the fact that somebody says, no, I trust you to run my showdowns and pre-releases, or I trust you to run events of that caliber, is an important part of the process. You need to be a kind and empathetic person, somebody that people want to work with. That is a requirement for judging. It's not just rules and policy knowledge. There is a deeply human component as well. And the Turing test doesn't even work anymore. We have computers left and right feigning humanity. And so I need you to be in person and somebody to evaluate you in person. And that's what the endorsement is for. And having the test available before the endorsement means that people will feel entitled to a certification that they might not be ready for. And it's so hard to take that away from somebody after they think they've earned it. Would the store, Toxic Korean asks, would the store need to reach out to be considered an endorser, or would Cascade reach out first? So the way this is going to work is we are going to, on Nexus, have a tournament organizer role, and that's going to be something that will validate either against some list that we have, validate manually, validate against an API that we pull from FFG from all of their partner stores. So any store can create an account. The ideal workflow is a store creates an account with an email address that is linked to a verified store email address. They now get the tournament organizer role on Nexus. They can search up any judge in the Nexus judge finder, select a judge, and then just write out a quick endorsement. One of the things that I'm working on for next week, in addition to the test, is a description of the process and how to write a good endorsement. For level 1, the endorsement is essentially just writing out, I trust judge name to run pre-releases and store showdowns, period. That's all that the endorsement needs to be. It can even be, I trust judge name to run weekly play events at my store. I think they'd make a great judge, period. That's all you need. Tennessee Feet Monk says, have to assume all PQ stores would be official locations. Hope it's easy since making stores go through hoops is going to be a nuisance. Yep. So our goal is every store that has, every game store that can run Star Wars events. So pretty much any store that has bought Star Wars product can endorse somebody for level 1. For higher levels, for level 3, you'll need to be either an L4 or a tournament organizer who has run a planetary qualifier to endorse somebody for L3, because L3 is the line where we say you're now ready to head judge a planetary qualifier, and stores that have run planetary qualifiers are going to be able to identify judges who can run planetary qualifiers. Stores that haven't run planetary qualifiers might not be able to do that. The process for a judge to be verified should be, and this is what we want it to be, is go to nexus.cascadegames.com, create an event, or create an account, say, I would like to be a tournament organizer. That's all that they should need to do. That's what we want it to be. Then we take the email address that they give us, we compare it to a list that we have using technology and software. They get that role automatically immediately after creating their account. And then they're able to endorse people. Then they can just type in Tennessee Feet Monk into the judge search, say endorses level 1. They can type in Toxic Korean and say endorses a level 1 judge. We want to make that threshold incredibly low. We want to make it accessible, right? We want to make sure that stores are endorsing judges and L2s are endorsing judges and putting in some effort. But we don't want it to be a particularly high barrier to entry. If it is more than create an account and click a button, that is a very hard sell for stores. And so we want to make sure that this process is as easy as possible, which is why we would prefer to have the full database from our friends over at FFG rather than any sort of manual verification process where they send me an email, I check it, I say, okay, you're good to go, I've assigned you the role, and sometimes they have to wait a day or two if I'm traveling, and then they'll just never do it if they have to wait a day or two because it's not that important to them. So yeah, we're going to try and make it as simple as possible and as accessible as possible for stores to make themselves tournament organizers. But that is one of the big things that we are working on, and is currently probably the biggest requirement that we need to continue to develop before we're able to release level 1. However, once we have it ready, we're going to be able to use that for judge reviews. We're going to be able to use it for level 2. We're going to be able to use it for all sorts of things. With that, unless I have any more last minute questions, I'm just going to hang out with y'all for another 30 seconds or a minute. Again, thank you all for joining me. I'm glad to hear that this was a helpful lesson. It's possible that I'll run this again and just be like, hey, I'll ask the Discord, hey, is there a time when people who weren't able to make the first lesson would like to show up and have me go through Melee again? In the future, I probably won't select pods and do other weird stuff because I was doing some weird stuff that first time, and that caused some problems. But thank you all for joining me. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.